Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 175. If that kid lives, I'm going to kill him. The second full day of camp elapsed much as the same as the first. He was working one for all harder than he'd ever worked it before, and he could tell he was making progress. Taking down Pixie Bob's golems was becoming easier each time he did it, which she realized, of course, so now he had to obliterate them rather than just defeating them. If the golem wasn't in small enough pieces of dirt by the time he took it down, then she would deem the exercise a failure and send him through it again until he did it right. He was going to be turning these creatures to dust by the time the week was through, which he supposed was the point, but that didn't make it any less exhausting. The brutal training on top of the piss-poor sleep he was getting compounded his exhaustion, and by the third day, he was contemplating taking Eraser up on his offer to find a solution to his fitful rest. He was starting to look just as bad as his unfortunate classmates, who were forced to take remedial lessons after training on account of them failing the practical. Kaminari, Kirishima, Ashido, Sato, and Monoma from Class B all trickled into their respective sleeping quarters 2 hours after everyone had already fallen asleep, which, of course, woke Izuku up every single time. When the Pussycats announced that they had arranged a test of courage group activity for after dinner, he had half a mind to sneak out and just go to bed while everyone left him alone. He probably would have if that didn't mean that someone would be forced to go through the forest without a partner, because unlike Class B, Class A still had an even number of students not in remedial courses. Class B was set up in the forest first to jump out and scare the pairs of Class A students who were walking through. He was disappointed that pairs were decided by drawing lots, but he figured it would do him good to socialize with people outside his immediate circle. At least he didn't get stuck with Katsuki like Todoroki did. Izuku's name was pulled dead last, which stung a little, even though it was completely random. He felt like he was back in middle school getting picked last in gym class again. He'd been paired with Sero, which he didn't mind, but he felt a little rude trying his best not to fall asleep as they talked while waiting for their turn to walk through the forest. So, did you really learn English fluently from watching movies? Sero asked. The question rose him from the half-sleep, dazed state that he was in. Oh, no, not entirely. I had classes in grade school like most everyone else, but I also studied on my own, reading online and stuff like that, he explained awkwardly. Sero didn't need to know that he had only applied himself so hard because he was naive enough to think that his father was actually working in America, and he thought it would make his mom happy if he could help her when they visited. The little kid logic was faulty in retrospect, but hey, it worked out in his best interest in the end. But you're mostly self-taught. That's impressive. I only know Spanish because my grandma's from Mexico and she refused to talk to any of us in Japanese when we were growing up. She got my mom in on it too half the time. It was so annoying, but I'm thankful for it now. It makes English so much easier. Of course, now she only speaks to me in English, so I guess I'm just back at square one with her, he shared with a laugh. She's trilingual? That's so cool, he responded, not having the energy to give more thoughtful feedback. She's crazy. She got herself through college in Japan, working as an au pair. She barely even knew Japanese when she started. Nearly flunked out of her first year because of it, but she says necessity is the best way to learn. I don't know about the best, but I guess it's probably the fastest. We'll both be trilingual too by the time Mike's through with us, so that's something to look forward to, Sero mused. Yeah, JSL is a lot easier to learn than English was, or at least I think. He cut himself off as an all too familiar zapping pain shot through his skull. In a split second, he was wide awake and scanning the area for any sign of a threat. Mandalay, call everyone back. Something's wrong. He shot to his feet and warned before he could think better of it. What do you mean? She asked, sounding dubious but genuinely concerned nonetheless. I don't... There's... Another zap cut him off again. I don't know what it is, but there's something wrong. Just do it, he said with all the conviction he felt but couldn't comprehend. Mandalay considered him for a moment before complying. Everyone, report back to camp immediately. The exercise is over. Izuku could hear Mandalay's voice beamed directly into his mind through her quirk. The sensation was odd, but he was too preoccupied to dwell on it. You'd better have a good reason for this, kid, Pixie Bob warned him, but her words held no real heat. He was about to point out the smoke on the horizon rising up from the tree line, but at that exact moment he saw Pixie Bob start to get pulled into the forest by an invisible force. He ran forward to grab her, and when they met, he felt a force pushing him away. They clung to each other, and that was enough to stay in one place until Sero's tape wrapped around the both of them and pulled them back to the group. Izuku wasted no time in gesturing to the smoke, curling up on the horizon and blotting out the stars, warning the rest of the group. With that task completed, Izuku returned his focus to the area of the forest the invisible force had originated from. No one who was supposed to be at this camp had a quirk that could do that. Smoke has been spotted. Forest fire suspected. Everyone report back to camp. Mandalay clarified her warning. Before she had even finished her sentence, two figures emerged from the trees, one with a large build and a clunky metal staff, and the other smaller figure had a lizard mutation quirk. Presumably, the larger one's quirk was responsible for whatever invisible force that was. You kiddies are sharp, but you're no match for us. Why don't we have a girls' night? Spinner, you go hang out with the boys. The first figure taunted them. As fast as it had happened the first time, Pixie Bob, and now Mandalay as well, started flying toward the villain while everyone else was pushed back. Thankfully, Pixie Bob wasn't caught unaware again. She erected a wall of dirt between them before they even made it halfway across the clearing. The collision probably wasn't pleasant, but it was likely better than whatever the villain had in store for them. The other figure, Spinner apparently, was pushed toward them. And as he unsheathed a massively impractical sword, Izuku had a horrifying thought. Where's Kota? He shouted over to Mandalay as Tiger met Spinner in the center of the clearing. A matching horrified look made its way onto her face. I don't know. Ragdoll is the only one who knows where he wanders off to. Mandalay answered him through her quirk. Kids, get inside now! Tiger shouted at the small group of them left witnessing the scene unfold. I know where he is, Izuku replied to Mandalay, ignoring Tiger's order. The rest of his classmates weren't rushing to comply anyway. Ida, Kota, Ojiro, Sero, and Hitoshi all stood their ground. What the hell are you doing here? He heard Hitoshi shout out to the villain, still holding them at a distance, and Pixie Bob and Mandalay against the mound of earth between them. The dumbass responded, but didn't get the chance to get a single word out before Hitoshi took control and forced them to drop their quirk. With one of the two threats neutralized and the remaining one thoroughly engaged with Tiger, his classmates looked ready to stand down and head back to base. Izuku, however, was not. Sero, restrain them carefully. Hitoshi, hold on, he instructed his classmates before turning to the unoccupied pussycats. I need to go get Kota, he explained, turning on his heel to run immediately. Wait, not without us! Pixie Bob shouted from behind him, but he didn't slow down. It's a cliff edge, 2 kilometers to the northeast. You'll slow me down, he shouted over his shoulder and took a running leap to the sky. He'd seen All Might do this countless times. He just needed to cushion his fall with a shockwave. He'd been wanting to try this since the entrance exam. No time like the present, right? As he soared above the forest, he saw a patch of gas that looked distinctly different from the black smoke rising from the blue fire to the west. That was probably something to worry about, But right now, he had to focus on landing without turning into a pancake or a pine tree shish kebab. He used his pinky finger to aim a one-for-all powered flick toward the patch of land he was about to flatten himself against, fully expecting to shatter the poor abused phalanges to bits again. But to his shock and gratitude, he rolled with his momentum in the small clearing and back up onto his feet with all his bones intact. He hadn't made it all the way to where he needed to be, but he was close enough. He could see the cliffside, and he couldn't risk flattening Kota trying to cushion his fall again anyway. He sprinted the rest of the way in a flash of green sparks. The entire journey took him about 15 seconds with no injuries. He was subconsciously proud of that, but the hulking figure getting ready to crush Kota under his fist took up a larger portion of his conscious thoughts. His limbs moved before he had even fully processed the scene unfolding in front of him, and he came to a screeching halt on the other side of the cliff with Kota in his arms. He felt the solid rock under his feet shake with the force of the blow that villain had aimed at Kota, and red-hot fury pumped through his veins like magma. The violence was completely senseless. He tried to kill a child for no reason at all. When Izuku looked up and actually took in the figure standing before them, his heart sank, and for the first time in a long time, he froze. By the grace of some sort of fricked up, backward serendipitous bullshit, Muscular himself was standing there watching them with a feral grin on his face. Jiminy crickets, this must be something straight out of Kota's worst nightmares. If luck be on his side, it would also be something straight out of Izuku's worst nightmares, too, assuming that he lived through this fight. Oh, I'm looking for you. You're on the list. Muscular greeted him casually, as if they were out for coffee. Kota, I need you to run, okay? He instructed the terrified child quietly as he set him down on shaky feet. No, God, that kid was brave. Brave and incredibly stupid. Not that there was much of a difference between the two traits when it came down to it. Kota, I've got this. Go. Now, he commanded. Aw, how thoughtful of you to try and spare him. Neither of you are getting away. But I only need one of you alive. Muscular taunted. So you need me alive? Foolish to show your cards like that. You'll touch a hair on his head over my dead body. He shot back with a confidence that he did not have. See, Kota, he needs me. I'll be fine, he said much more quietly to the child clinging to his leg. He didn't have time to stall. He needed to defeat Muscular before the Pussycats had the chance to catch up to him. He couldn't let Kota see them like that. He doubted that was something he would be able to recover from, even if they made it out alive. So, how was he going to do that? Muscular had enhanced strength and speed like All Might, but he also had a regenerative shock-absorbent armor with the frankly disgusting musculature wrapping around his limbs. So fighting him was like fighting the Nomu from the USJ. Terrific. How did he beat the Nomu? Well, he didn't, but it had an obvious weakness to exploit, and with the scar on his face warped around a bionic eye on his left side, Muscular seemed to have a pretty obvious weakness as well. Izuku inwardly cringed at the thought, but he had no other choice here. He had to aim for the eyes. He guiltily flicked his leg backwards, dislodging Kota and sending him sliding back against the rock face behind him. He heard a quiet oomph as Kota collided with the wall, but he kept his focus forward. Muscular's laugh boomed across the distance between them, and he sneered before he spoke. They didn't say I had to bring you back in one piece. Can you point me in the direction of that explosion, kid? I'll round him up when I'm done with you, he said, almost giddy before he charged forward. He was after Kacchan too? Wait, crap! Kota was still directly behind him. He couldn't dodge. He let One for All flow through him and did his best to match his opponent blow for blow. He met Muscular's fist with a kick, and both of them went tumbling backward a few paces. "Kota, run!" he shouted with more force than he would have liked to use with a traumatized child, but he wasn't moving. He didn't have time to check and see if his instructions were followed this time around. If he stayed on the defensive, then their battle would just keep inching closer and closer to the kid. So he charged forward. He knew Muscular was toying with him, and he had to use that to his advantage. He towed the line, moving slower than he was fully capable of, but still fast enough to not get himself maimed. He needed to lower his opponent's guard if he was going to get the chance he needed. He was playing a dangerous game, and it was only a matter of time before he made a gamble that didn't pay off. He dodged one punch too slow, and the force of it made him miss All Might's oh-so-gentle Detroit smashes. The fist collided with his shoulder, and he collided with the rock face 30 feet behind him, practically before he could even register the initial blow. By the grace of a god he didn't believe in, he managed to shield his skull from cracking against the rugged stone. He was dazed, and something was surely broken, most likely his collarbone. It hurt like heck to move his arm. Risking another hit like that was out of the cards. He hoped that he'd curbed Muscular's expectations enough to get in close now, because he was only going to have one shot at this. With as much of One for All as he trusted his body not to collapse under, he charged at Muscular, leaping up to his head perched upon grotesquely engorged shoulders. He reached out and dug his fingers into the man's eye sockets. Izuku was sure he wouldn't forget the awful popping sensation under his fingers until the day he died. He pressed his foot against Muscular's chest to launch himself back out of his opponent's guard, but even blind and in agony, he managed to grab Izuku's ankle and fling him violently back into the cliff face. He wasn't fast enough to brace this time. His already injured shoulder hit first and his jaw second. If his collarbone wasn't already broken, it definitely was now. He cried out in pain and felt his jaw grind back into place when he forced his mouth shut. A pathetic whimper escaped through his clenched teeth, but he doubted anyone could hear it over Muscular's pained and panicked screams. "You friggin' runt!" Muscular yelled once he had gotten enough of a handle on his pain to speak. He had the other man's blood under his nails. He felt nauseous. But this fight wasn't over. Muscular looked like he was gearing up for a hit that might take the entire cliffside down with it. And Izuku had another sick idea. Before morality could get the better of him, he dashed a few paces to his opponent's left and with a running start delivered a kick hard enough to send the ill-prepared blind man flying back and into the cave on the far end of the cliffside. His enraged cries echoed hauntingly out of the mouth of his tomb, and as Izuku had expected, Muscular didn't stop swinging blindly. He felt the earth shake as the man's fist connected with something, and he just watched as the rock cracked and collapsed, trapping Muscular in the mountain's maw. He stood there, horrified at what he had done, until the dust settled. He almost wept for joy when he heard Muscular's continued muffled attempts to escape. He didn't kill him. He wasn't a murderer. He was shaking and frozen again, though. He stood there watching the debris rustle until a distant voice pulled him out of his horrified trance. "Midoriya!" He heard a woman's voice in the forest. "Midoriya, return to camp!" He heard another woman's voice echo through his skull. Mandalay and Pixie Bob. That was Mandalay and Pixie Bob. He looked over to where he had last seen Kota and was equal parts horrified and relieved to see he was no longer there. Pixie Bob came gliding up onto the cliffside in a wave of fluid earth and let out a relieved breath when she saw him standing there, relatively in one piece. Mandalay has Kota. Where's... She cut herself off and shifted her focus to the shaking mound of rubble in front of him. Though the clarification was no longer necessary, Izuku pointed a bloodied finger at the wreckage. Pixie Bob's eyes widened and she placed her hands on the ground, turning the loose rubble back into solid stone, thoroughly sealing Muscular in a coffin of Izuku's making. You're injured. We need to get back to camp. Pixie Bob spoke to him calmly. That was her, I'm talking to a scared civilian voice, not the brash, violent tone he had grown used to over the past few days. He must look a wreck. Where's Mandalay? I need to speak to Mandalay, he said, rather than following instructions. She's on her way back to camp with Kota. Come on, Pixie Bob replied in that same gentle tone. He turned to follow her instructions and his leg nearly buckled at the first step. The sudden movement sent a jolt of pain through his shoulder, and that was enough to pull his mind back into his aching body. He took off sprinting toward camp with Pixie Bob barely keeping pace behind him. He was running so quickly that he nearly didn't have time to stop the head-on collision course he found himself in with Eraser running toward him. He corrected course and slowed down enough for Eraser and Pixie Bob to keep up. Eraser, you need to give the students permission to fight back. They're after Kachan. Mandalay needs to pass the information. He trailed off when he realized something. Eraser wasn't going to let him go back out and help his classmates. To Eraser, he wasn't Ivy right now. He was Izuku, just another kid in his class who he had to protect. Regardless of Eraser's wishes, he could not sit idly by while his friends were in danger. Injury report, Eraser demanded, ignoring what Izuku had said for the time being. Izuku cringed and hoped that he'd live to hear the lecture this stunt was about to earn him. Find Mandalay and tell her what I said, he instructed before leaping into the sky again. Whether or not Eraser could see Izuku now, he couldn't erase his quirk, not without forcing him to fall to his death. If he had tried to run away, Eraser would have caught him. This was his only option if he wanted to save his friends. He saw a dark shadow peeking above the trees to the west. The quirk seemed to be raging completely out of control, so with a flick of air to the east, he started heading in that direction. He could see Eraser navigating above the trees with his scarf on a series of stone pillars, no doubt courtesy of Pixie Bob, but he wasn't nearly as fast as Izuku. Eraser would catch up to him eventually, but right now, Izuku needed to save his friends. End of chapter.